It is 2 p.m. Central African time on this beautiful Thursday afternoon. It's a very good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining us today on this FESBC Market View edition. And coming up on the show today, we want to dive into a very critical conversation around the insights shared at the recent International Labour Organization workshop. Now, the business federations were equipped with transformative strategies to promote social protection, as well as to champion gender equality and prevent exploitation in the workplace. Sakile Shabong is going to join us. He is the Secretary for the Federation of Eswatini Business Community in the Lubombo region. He did attend this workshop and is going to break down how FESBC is weaving these recommendations into their daily operations, as well as supporting small-scale businesses, as well as small-scale business owners. A conversation about building fair, resilient, as well as inclusive enterprises. Very, very important. One that you simply cannot miss. Stay tuned for that conversation. We also do want to chime into the International Finance Corporation by looking at some of the headlining news there, as it is continuing to be a conversation that is critical in improving the relationship between our public and private sector for the economic growth of the Kingdom of Eswatini. We'll be hearing from Mehita Fani, who is the country manager at the IFC, as well as some other speakers there who have spoken candidly about improving the economy of Eswatini through this important partnership. Sandra Lesbia will join us to wrap up the show and take us straight into Wall Street, help us dissect the indices of the day as we look at today's market analysis. Thank you for staying with us and for tuning in to FESBC Market View. Let's start the show by looking at business news. Group and the African Development Bank have committed to providing access to electricity to 300 million people in the sub-Saharan Africa by 2030, and this includes Eswatini under the 300 initiative. Now, World Bank resident representative Ikechi Okori says Eswatini will indeed benefit under an amount of over 1.8 billion emalangeni, which is equivalent to 100 million US dollars under this initiative. Let's listen.
So together with the World Bank and the African Development Bank, the two presidents agreed to have, this Mission 300, which is basically making sure that 300 million Africans have access to electricity. And we feel for Eswatini this is important because Eswatini right now have about 82% access. So we're trying to get it to 100%, universal access by 2030. And I think it's something that is very doable. So through this support that we're providing to Eswatini, we are hoping that not only will we expand the network, we'll as well explore opportunities for off-grid, systems to ensure that there are about 300 new connections, 200,000 new connections by 2030. And we believe that clearly Eswatini is on the path to being one of the countries that meets that target of universal access by 2030. The resources being put together is about 100 million US dollars, of which 50 is basically concessional, which means very cheap loans, to the government, to be able to support this.
On another note, the resident representative also explained about the Business Ready survey, which is being conducted in the country.
No, the Be Ready is an iteration. We used to call it before doing business report. But that has changed now. It's Be Ready now. Eswatini happens to be on the second pilot. The first pilot, the report got launched in October this year. So the second pilot is going to be launched next year. So there's an enterprise survey that is going on. Survey questions have been sent out to businesses in Eswatini to basically give feedback around several things: regulations, how easy it is to get access to finance, how easy it is to get licenses. And the whole goal there is to say, once we get that, we benchmark Eswatini amongst other countries. We can now have a roadmap. What are the reforms that the government needs to make to ensure that it's easier for businesses to operate in Eswatini? And that is going to come from, obviously, feedback that these businesses are going to be giving to us. And it's done in a very independent way, in a very transparent way, and we're hoping that when the results come out, we'll have a conversation with government, we'll have a conversation with the stakeholders as to what is coming through. But the idea is basically situate government reforms based on facts, based on data, and compared as well to what other countries are doing, so that Eswatini can have a kind of a roadmap.
In May last year, the World Bank's Board of Executive Directors endorsed a new country partnership framework for Eswatini for the year 2024-2028, with an overarching goal of supporting Eswatini's shift to a more private sector-led growth model that can promote inclusive, sustainable, and resilient economic growth. For FESBC Market View, Nelson Dlangamandla, Vuminkosi Nzinisa, Ezulwini.
The International Finance Corporation has identified 10 local companies in the agribusiness sector with the possibility of financing some of them depending on the viability as well as the eligibility of the projects. Now, the corporation's country manager, Mahita Fani, shared this during an interview at the Private Sector Day at Ezulwini.
Increasing the access to finance is key, and this is something we have already started. The second point is creating access to market by developing value chains that can create inclusive growth, creating the necessary capacity building so that on both public and private side, and also identifying and structuring sustainable public-private partnership projects for the infrastructure sector. We visited Eswatini several times after the country private diagnostic study that we did. We mapped 70 companies in the agri-industry sector. We came and visited 10 of them, and we are still talking with them about their potential expansion and development plan that will require some financing, and we are talking to them to see which of them could be eligible. And for those who are not eligible now, what is required for them to be eligible, and supporting them in getting ready for financing that we can provide.
During the International Finance Corporation's Private Sector Day, Eswatini Bank's Managing Director, Nozizwe Mulela, shared some of the challenges faced by small-scale businesses and solutions provided by the banking sector.
We will have asset finance. We will use the assets as collateral instead, the very assets that we're funding. We will also have working capital that is aligned to your cash flow, so that we will ensure that when the monies that you are expecting, when they come in, they are able to clear your issues. We then have credit guarantees, for instance. I think government has provided credit guarantees through the central bank for SMEs. They can use that also as security or collateral to support the lending. So we do have tailor-made products. We do have credit guarantees that kind of address that particular issue. But another big challenge is the issue of cash flow. SMEs usually have cash flow challenges, and sometimes and mostly they are caused by delayed payments. And that is a challenge, again, it's a risk for us as financiers. We then have products, though, that align to that. For instance, we will have invoice financing. Those are products that we avail to make sure that as much as there's a cash flow challenge, but there's a product that will support that and mitigate the risk.
The International Finance Corporation held its first Private Sector Day in Eswatini in collaboration with Business Eswatini on Wednesday. The main aim was how government and the private sector can collaborate for inclusive economic growth. For FESBC Market View, Nelson Dlangamandla, Vuminkosi Nzinisa, Ezulwini.
That's the first segment of this edition's FESBC Market View. We'll go for an ad break. We sit down with FESBC after the break.
Sabatandi ukuthi njengalokhu sivile sive sikhulume
Welcome back to the program and thank you for staying with us. The International Labour Organization held a workshop about 2 weeks ago where business federations were capacitated on the importance of social protection, gender equality, as well as avoiding exploitation in businesses, amongst other topics. We are now joined by Sakile Shabango from the Federation of Eswatini Business Community, who was also in attendance. He's going to unpack how the Federation is incorporating some of the recommendations of the ILO in their daily operations, as well as their engagements with small-scale business holders in the country, particularly local ones, indigenous ones. Pele, welcome to the program. Siyakwemukela indzaba lenkulu ngamaswati emtsabo. Siyathwalwa ukuthi mani khulumisana na ILO. Lasimathe ukuthi ugcila kakhulu etindzabeni temazinga, labasike ngesingisi ngema standards. Kungaba nje kusicathatela ukuthi yini vele ILO lani khumbute kuko. Siyathwe ukuthi vele tindzaba vele ntisebenta mayelana nemazinga. Lentawo bese ke ning FESBC niyakwenda kuhlangabeta emaswati emtsabo soma business bemtsabo kutotona ke tindzaba tema standards.
Ngiyabonga. Siyajabula nje lokuthi ILO ube naleli thuba lokuthi asibite nalaba ama journalist kuyosi capacitator ngema standard latsingakalako even tsineke singu FESBC si umbrella yalamaswati lenda emabhizinisi emtsabo. Kusho ukuthi lamaswati emtsabo nje latendele emabhizinisi lokhanza ukuthi yena ungena ebhizinisini ngaloko ukuthi ufuna kuthi ondle umndeni wakhe anganaki lamanye ama standard. Ngingabekisa nje ukhanza ukuthi indlela lekatawuqasha ngayo angaqasha noma umntwana lomncane sikhatsi lekatawusebenta ngaso ukhanza ukuthi utawusebenta tikhatsi letingekho emthethweni kuphindze futhi kuhambelane nalendlela nje yaloko ukuthi vele lamabhizinisi abo bayawa register yini kulomthetho wahulumende bayahambelana yini bayacomply yini nalendo lefuna nguhulumende ukuthi yendeke. I think itsine nje lapho kusita kakhulu ku communicate nalama members ethu ukuthi akhone kungena kulama standard.
Indzaba lenkulu ngoba nasikhuluma ngetindzaba temazinga sitibonile ukuthi tiyinsayeya kakhulu vele kubosoma business lapha ekhaya. Kungasibo ke labancane kuphela nabo sonvonzima mangabe sebafuna kuphuma lapha ekhaya bathengiselane nalamanye emave. Indzaba yema standards siyayisikhanza ukuthi cishe ngathi sisalele emuva. Engabe FESBC uthini kenyalo kubosoma business yini lento babamba ngayo ngetandla nithi asiyilungiseni lenzaba?
Kunyendi so vele uqalile FESBC ubita ema workshop nema dialogue ukuthi kuzame lokuthi lama issues lebawafaceako bosoma business nabaphumela ngephandle nalaba labakhona nje labancane abayivete ukuthi yini so that FESBC atawube seyena uyakuthatha uyakhona kuhlanganisa laba labafanele ukuthi ikhulumisa. Ngingabekisela nje nangabe sifuna ukukhuluma nge-tax i-tax icishe inqumbi yabo labanye babe sebayawo emabhizinisini ngaloko ukuthi naku introduce i-tax lo muntu uvungazisi sekutodla lokuncane lenkukolekako and then agcine sekayekele noma abuyele back ayohlala phansi.
Nginakile lo ukuthi kakhulu kunaba labathengisa kakhulu ema products kwendlula lama services ngoba lama services kulula lokucisha ubona silelizinga leli ke liphuwa for lack of a better term noma ke lingephasi walokule ngutayile but kulama products ngathi kusheshe kucebe ngidawubekisa nje nangabe uthengisa emahabhula lendlalo wabophe ngayo eplastikini noma sowabophile ke la plastikini nangiwabuka ngoba la plastic avame ukukhomisa la khazi ukhanze ukuthi lehabhula linemhlabathi kulula lo ukuthi ngingakuthengi lokudla lokho hambe kuyothengana kuloko ngathi kuhlobile so yindzaba lengithakaselako lena futhi lesiyithokotelako ekutheni niyayilungisa ning FESBC nabo ke bosoma business bayilalela. Ingichaza ngoba iyama kakhulu endzabeni yemithetho sisangena kuyo-ke imithetho akhona ama-policies akhona ama-issues le singasho ukuthi bosomabhizinisi bemtsabu but ikhanza bahlangabetana nawo latawufuna nawo ukuthi bafune kuvulwa emehlo ngemifunza sikolwa nangemihlangano sikolwa yini FESBC layendako kulolo hlangothi
kulolo hlangothi vele ikakhulu nawubuka even nelive lethu lelingumakhelwane sekuwe kwavela nje lokuthi when it comes to le packing vele kuyafuna lokuthi kuhlolwe tindvo letinikwa sive ukuthi tingabe setiba ingoti so singu FESBC sine sesivele sayigijimela leyo lokuthi labantu bafundziswe kabanti ngalama standards kuze batosi nabakhokha lokho lokuphakejwako lokuya ku-esiveni kube kulelizinga lokuthi akubulali isive and then lokunye ke siphinze futhi singu FESBC sibazamele laba kwekuthi bakhone lokuthi nalama business abo nyalo sale bakhona kwashintsha njenganyalo nje sesingena ku green economy
yes
lokuthi letindvo tenu tenteni ukuthi tihambelane nalendlela le weather lesayingiyo so that nitobamba lamazinga ungabese utikhanza ukuthi so expose ema fruits akho elangeni ngenxa yokuthi sekuchinja letimo tale climate siyazama nje lokuthi sibafundzise nalokuthi ke siyende le dialogue yokuthi babe khona bona batokhuluma tingaki lebahlangana nato basayinda lamabhizinisi abo and then nalolusito ke kuthi hulumende angabasita ngayiphi indlela kubahlangabeta kuletingaki lokhanza ukuthi bayatibheka nabasayinda le business lokunye ke singu FESBC siyangena ku policy making ngoba lokho lesikuvako lasivene ngiko lokubese kwakha lamapolisi lokuthi kuze sikhone kuhlalisana kahle kufuna lamapolisi nawo avumelane nalesive avumelane futhi nahulumende uhambe kahle kube smooth and then sitokhona kuphilisana kungabi nemsindo
Mpele sibonga kakhulu isikhathi sakho lomuhla emini lokusithokozisa kakhulu ngiko lokulosicathatela kona ukuthi ikakhulu nje nalihlangothi lotekulima lo wende sibonelo ngalo indzaba yabo smart eco farming indzaba lenkulu kakhulu leyo ngoba ayisebenzisa tebuchwephesha kuphela siyadinga vele tebuchwephesha sibonile nemphunga savana maziya itolo ithinza indzaba ibambene tandla nayo indvuna yetekulima mandla chawuke ekuthenini nasa inviter nathi laba bahlanyela imali abasisite phela ukuthi sibe nalabo agriculture smart farming labo eco farming laba sebenzisa le technology but at the same time banciphise lama environmental impacts lesikhanza ukuthi mabi sithemba ukuthi bosomabhizinisi belive la kangwane labancane nalabo ke labacathuta lesabakhulile batawukhona ukuthi babe bosondvo nzima bakusasa ngekubanjiswa nguFESBC asibahlole emarket tester ubuya sibuke inombolo emarket ukuthi namhla tisitshela
When you choose your adventures, you do so with an open heart and a desire for the unexpected. You embark on journeys to discover new worlds full of wonder. You choose a path to awaken your senses, a world to make you look up and realize just how inspiring this life can be. Arrive and awaken your heart. Explore life in ways only thought possible in your dreams. Discover just how far you go to expand your understanding of life's greatest mysteries. There's just one place on this planet with so much to offer. Now is the time for you to have the royal experience in the kingdom.
20 minutes after 2. Thank you for staying with us. This is Market View, the FESBC edition on Thursday. Sanele Sbia joins us virtually to help us dissect these numbers here, looking at the market analysis of the day, from what is happening in the US to equities as well as commodities. We also want to look at the currency pairs as well as the Asian markets, and even closer to home, South African markets with the Johannesburg Exchange All Share Index. Mr. Sbia, thank you so much for staying with us on the program and joining us this afternoon. Looking at these numbers here, we are seeing the US markets completely on the red today. Just help us go through these numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Ngumalo, and good afternoon to the viewer. So what we are seeing there, Mr. Ngumalo, is yes, the numbers are red, showing that on a daily, at the time with the markets closed yesterday in the US, the numbers were starting to show somewhat of a downward trend. But what is interesting about these numbers, Mr. Ngumalo, is you will realize that the Dow Jones Industrial Average is still above that 44,000 mark. The Nasdaq Composite Index is still above that 19,000 mark. And the S&P 500 is just on the touch. It's just about to kiss that 6,000 mark. So these are still very all-time highs that we've been looking at this year. But what now is happening in terms of the numbers, what we're looking into is, well, we saw the consumer purchasing expenditure data coming out yesterday, showing that, those purchases, that inflation has somehow ticked up some 0.3 percentage points to 2.3 from 2 in the previous month. So that's what then the markets are now taking a step back to just internalize and see what this means for the Federal Reserve Bank in terms of cutting the interest rate. Are we going to continue seeing that much momentum at which they began in terms of cutting the interest rate, and now factoring in the Trump factor coming into January and the tariffs that are somehow predicted to also going to contribute to an increase in inflation if and indeed President Trump does go ahead with those tariffs. So that's what markets are looking into now, and just trying to see and look into a new direction in terms of where that interest rate story is going to go and where those tariff story is going to go. But overall, another thing that we need to be cognizant of right now is if you look at the small cap companies, they were now starting to gain on the background of that decline in inflation, more especially the retailers. So right now, if we're seeing that consumer purchasing expenditures going up a bit, that means that there's a bit of inflation, which might in a way just result in somewhat of a pullback from consumers, and then result in some slowing activity within that sector, Mr. Ngumalo.
Yeah.
And then when we move into London, the Eurozone, what we are seeing there is, yes, there are concerns around Trump and what he is going to do with the North American Free Trade Area and what that is going to mean for Europe as well. But today we're waking up to a relatively good day across Europe, where we know that in Germany, inflation is staying within the expected range. It's ticking up a bit, but across Europe, the inflation is staying at that expected range. So what we're also seeing right now is, a bit of a weakening in the dollar, also showing up, those European companies and those European stocks across the pond. So what we're looking into right now going forward is, will the European Central Bank stay its course in terms of the interest rate cuts, or are they going to be overly cautious in terms of what the Trump presidency would mean? And because depending on the stance that the Trump presidency takes, we might have to rethink that entire interest rate direction and the trajectory come January. But suffice it to know, Mr. Ngumalo, is the fact that we do not think, even though President Trump will get to initiate some tariffs, but a trade war is not going to be good for any one of us, and actually even for the Americans, it's not going to be good. So we are just hoping that we are cautiously going to go into that phase in January. But the beautiful thing about it is, yes, so we are going to go into a tariff and trade war type of environment, but as people would have it, it's now Trump 2.0, so it's nothing new. So we are seeing those numbers staying a bit pick up in London at 8,200, which is just a marginal gain. 19,336 in Germany at another marginal gain. And then France there at around that 7,183. We know that there is still that instability within France and that debt problem still persists within France. And then when we move into the Asian markets, you will see that Japan has gained a bit, but staying relatively at the same level of that 38,349. And then when you're coming into Hong Kong and in the mainland, we are seeing somewhat of some pullbacks in terms of those indices. So that's purely because, still within the mainland, we are still on the lookout for those new sources of growth, what the Chinese government is actually going to do to show up markets and just drive demand within China. And now trying to factor in the fact that we know that when President Trump comes, he is 98.9% likely to act on the Chinese tariff threat, might not necessarily act on the other nations, but will most likely, 98.9%, that's how I put it, he will act on the Chinese market. So we're seeing the markets trying to balance those, and this would not have come at a worse time while the Chinese economy is just still trying to find its feet again. And we don't know what the Trump presidency would mean for that. And then when we move into South Africa, again, we're seeing the South African Stock Exchange taking a step back today from that 85,000 mark yesterday back to 84,000 in terms of volumes. Again, that's how with the markets looking west and seeing what's happening with inflation in the US, signaling that it might go up a bit, and then you will shift again to Germany. Again, there's another signal that overall you might see inflation going up, and that again is going to affect what markets are going to do in terms of the interest rates. And we're hoping that there was growth that was going to come from that interest rate path. Those interest rate cuts were going to give us a bit of a breather. So that's what markets are looking forward into today. And then domestically, we've not seen any changes. Still, market activity is more in Eswatini. When you look at gold, you see that gold has actually taken a bit of an appreciation today. It's purely because we've seen the dollar weakening, against that inflation data. And when you're looking at the 10-year treasury yields in the US, those ones are still showing signs of improvement. So that's why we're seeing gold taking just a bit step up. And then where crude oil is coming down considerably to $72 per barrel. That's purely because the Middle East is just on the verge of signing that Article 19 deal, that ceasefire deal, that Article 191 deal, that ceasefire deal there. So they're just on the verge. And when you're listening to news coming from both sides, you can hear that they are now ready to actually sit down. There's a lot of points on which they agree on right now, and then a very few points on which they don't agree. So that means we are getting very close to that one. And then we also know that with OPEC, they will start normalizing output at some point later on in the year. And then when we come into the currencies, you'll see that the domestic currency has actually gained against all major currencies. It has gained a bit of ground against the US dollar. That's purely because of that inflation data that came and then causing just a pause within the US economy. And we are seeing a movement away from, that Trump euphoria, those Trump trades. Now we have to come back into reality and start trading, companies based on the fundamentals. And then same thing against the euro, we've edged up a bit again on that 1917 mark, and same thing against the Japanese yen. We are on that 1836 mark or 836 mark. That's purely because markets are looking into what's happening in the US and that bit of a loss in value in the dollar, and that bit of a confusion around what's happening in the US, and then therefore we've seen a bit of shift from back to those bonds and looking into what's happening domestically. Thank you, Mr. Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Sbia. Thank you to our viewers for staying with us on the program today. This has been the Thursday edition of Market View, sponsored or powered by FESBC. We hope that you're going to have a lovely and blessed afternoon. Bye-bye.